Hello, everyone, and welcome to the With Chinese Characteristics podcast. I'm Natalie.
I'm Cherry.
And together we talk about topics with Chinese characteristics, whatever those might be. So, Cherry, what's our topic for today?
Our topic for today is the rise and fall of the opium den.
Okay.
So, I'm going to get into it.
You're going to get into it? Okay,
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Have you heard of the phrase pipe dream?
It's like it's like a dream that's unlikely to
Come true?
come true.
Yes. So in a dictionary, it would be said to be a fantastic notion, hope, or story. And do you know where it came from?
I do not. I kind of always assumed it was almost like it was at the end of a pipe. Like you can
like the pipe is too long?
Yeah, like the pipe is too long. You can only look at the dream through a little hole.
Okay,
And
that's
you see the dream at the end of the pipe. It's very small.
So it's like
Like a binocular.
the binoculars,
Like
yeah.
a telescope.
Yeah. Well, according to phrases.org.uk, pipe dream has an American origin.
Okay.
And it came from describing an allusion to the dreams experienced by smokers of opium pipes.
I thought opium was more of a Chinese thing.
Well, that's what we're gonna talk about today. We're gonna debunk a lot of myth in this episode. But the earliest official reference of the phrase pipe dream was from the Chicago Daily Tribune in 1890, talking about how aerial navigation at the time has been regarded as a pipe dream for a good many years.
Aerial navigation?
Yes.
Like airplanes?
Yes.
Okay.
And then in 1896, it was used in a famous play without any effort to explain what the phrase meant. So, at that point, it was assumed that the audience already has prior knowledge of it.
Everybody knew what it was like. You know,
Exactly.
you go to the opium den,
Yeah,
you take a couple hits, and you start
that's
getting
how you feel.
You get crazy ideas.
So that was the fun fact of the episode. Now we're going to get into the episode. Opium itself. So in modern history, opium, in a way, is just a distant memory for most countries in the world. I think. It doesn't get mentioned often. Although I would argue it might have left a deeper mark in our culture and society than you think, which is why I wanted to start with the phrase pipe dream.
Can I tell you what I think of when you say it?
Yeah.
I think of when Marx said religion is the opiate of the masses.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. Okay.
So,
Yeah.
people knew what, I mean, I feel like opium, the drug itself, is very forgotten.
Yeah.
But the class of drug and the idea of it,
Yeah.
like opioids, opiates,
Yeah.
has a strong cultural tie still.
I agree.
Yeah.
So, for China, it is still the representation of a national shame, even today. We, of course, have just talked about the Opium War in the last episode.
We're going to talk about it more, I think.
Yeah, we're going to have a part 2. And we have, lots of history and baggage there already. And the Chinese society at large, I think, has internalized this concept of the sick man of Asia image. In many occasions, is presented as a man lying on an opium den, smoking opium.
Yeah.
And, I say that we have sort of internalized it because for what we believe now is that what we must prove otherwise, instead of saying that image itself was falsely represented to begin with.
So you're saying that the kind of general zeitgeist of Chinese history is it's like it was true and now we can't be that anymore.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So we did not challenge the
idea
itself.
That China was uniquely addicted to opium.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in addition, in China, anti-drug campaigns has never died down throughout regime change, right? The Qing dynasty, and then we had the Republic of China. Now we have the People's Republic of China. Always a thing. Very strong presence of anti-drug campaigns all the time.
Yeah, I mean, people complain about the U.S. war on drugs, like
China's always it's a permanent war on drugs, and you don't ever let loose.
Yeah, China had a war on drugs before the United States even existed.
Yes, so the memory is still very, very much being kept alive, and it's a very one-dimensional image of what opium represents. That's what we're doing.
We're gonna get into it.
Yeah, we're gonna get into it.
So we're gonna talk about your the international opium.
Yes. So
okay.
maybe this the title of this episode should be the rise and fall of the international opium den. China and elsewhere.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but first, as per it's our tradition now, let's go back to the roots. What is opium?
Yeah.
So opium is dried latex from the seed capsules of the opium poppy plant, with a scientific name I'm not going to try to pronounce. And the plant itself was grown in the Mediterranean region as early as 5000 BC. And the traditional method of obtaining the latex is to use a knife and score the seed pods by hand, and the milky juice leaks out and dries to a sticky yellowish residue.
Yeah, like I've seen them harvesting it, not in real life, but it's like, yeah, you slice it and the stuff bubbles out and it dries on the outside, and then you kind of scrape it out.
Yes.
Almost like the same thing as like a I don't know, like a rubber tree or something.
Yeah. And
the interesting thing is you said 5,000 years ago, because people think in the Odyssey and some other kind of Greek legends. Well, I don't know, the Odyssey is sort of history, sort of legend, but they talk about the island of the lotus eaters, and like everybody there eats this stuff and they get high.
Yeah.
And people think it's like an early reference to
opium poppies. Yeah.
Yeah.
The collection of the milky juice and its residue is a very labor-intensive process. So in modern days, they just harvest the whole thing, and then they dry it, which will become a concentrated version of the whole plant, and they just extract alkaloids from the whole plant.
Okay.
It is obviously nowadays produced into many narcotics, morphine, heroin, and such.
Yeah, most of which are legal, right? I mean, are real medicine.
Yeah. Well, drug medicine, it's...
Yeah.
The line shifts around and depends on who you're talking to.
Well, I mean, you call the place where you go buy medicine a drugstore.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, a drugstore in American English.
Yeah.
Is it a drugstore in British English?
Yeah. Chemist, drugstore.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you mentioned ancient Greece, which is interesting because there was this poppy goddess from the Minoan culture.
Okay.
And the Minoan culture was apparently the first civilization to appear on European soil. And it was located on the island of Crete, which is now a part of modern day Greece. And the statues of this goddess was discovered, and she wears poppy capsules on her head as like hair decorations. And I have a little picture here. I know it's a podcast, but I'll just show you the picture, and that's pretty obvious.
Yeah,
it's a pretty good close to life demonstration of the poppy plant. Anyhow, so statues.
So you'd have to be pretty naive to think that they didn't understand that you could get high off these things.
Exactly. Her eyes apparently was closed, and some researchers think it's to symbolize that she's sleepy under the influence of the drug, presumably. Although the poppy seeds also at this time served as a symbol of fertility, but the idea is that it has always been there and present in history, lots of evidence. So in ancient times, opium had a ritual significance, and it's speculated that ancient priests used it as a proof of healing power, which it does have. It's a drug. It has been known for a long time to relieve pain and sometimes used in surgical purposes.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly think you were healed.
Yeah.
The
illusion.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, pain relieving is a
and
medical...
And if it gets worse later, you say, oh, well, you're in the temple and
Yes.
God gave you their blessing, and so.
God is taking you now.
Yeah.
Yeah. We know that Arabic physicians used opium very extensively to treat diarrhea, which is true because opium apparently inhibits muscle movements in the bowel, leading to constipation.
Yeah, no, if you're like have cancer, you're some surgery and they have to give you opium, like morphine long term, they have to give you laxatives too.
Yeah.
Otherwise you
Won't be able to poop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So between 400 and 1200 AD, Arab traders introduced and traded opium to China and India by 700. And soldiers returning home from the Crusades in the 11th to 13th century brought opium back to European wisdom as well.
Guys, you got to check this stuff out.
So all of these just, evidence that it's always been there. It's a very constant presence in human history.
I think it's like a lot of these things, though, where, the stuff's so hard to make and it's so labor intensive that it's not really a problem when you can't make it at industrial scales. Right, because it's like you can't, it's expensive. It's gonna be a rare thing. It's not like an entire society.
It's not a commodity. It's a luxury good at this point.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of that, by the 18th century, we've moved on. Fast forward, opium was a pretty common medicine now used by Western physicians. And this is the time, just to put things into perspective, when like mercury and arsenic was, also commonly used in medicine. It's like when we say medicine, it's really different from probably today's standards.
Some stuff worked, some stuff didn't.
Yeah, different landscape. Or some stuff was just poison, right?
Yeah.
So it was used to treat for cholera, dysentery, and diarrhea as a cough suppressant sometimes, and for insomnia, puts you to sleep. Right? And then it was also used for nervous disorders, so they would give it to mentally ill patients.
Or probably if you had like seizures or
it's a sedative.
Tremors or something too.
No, they would give it to like what they think was crazy people.
Okay.
It's a sedative.
Oh, okay.
So, and in the 19th century, famously, U.S. President William Henry Harrison, the one that didn't get to be president for very long.
Yeah,
so
he was
died.
like president for like 3 days or something.
No, I think a month actually.
Was he a month? I know he gave like a speech in the rain.
It was too cold. Yeah.
And then sick.
Yeah. So he was treated, when he got sick, he was treated with opium. And that was 1841. Although he did die pretty soon afterwards. But he received many different drugs because the process of treating him was pretty long. And like there were several drugs that had opium in it. So it was very common. And apparently in the American Civil War, the Union Army used 175,000 pounds of opium extract and powder, and as well as 500,000 opium pills, which was, I had no idea.
As a painkiller, I'm guessing, for surgeries and stuff.
I mean, dysentery too.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to have dysentery in the military.
Well, there's a famous thing that the World War I is the first war, possibly in all of human history, where more people died from combat than from disease. Because things like the Civil War, everybody's getting dysentery,
right,
pooping their guts out.
Well, that's a great image to have for the rest of the episode.
What? I had dysentery.
You did have dysentery.
Well, I was in the army.
I will give you're allowed to talk about it now.
I can talk about my struggle with dysentery.
Yes. So it was also used as soothing syrup, like in soothing syrup as an ingredient for children teething. Just like Coca-Cola in the modern times, it was used in painkillers. So really, when you ask me, like, what do they use it in the American Civil War for? Really, the answer could be everything. Yeah. It was a cure for all kind of a drug.
I mean, the baby's definitely going to get calm after you give it opium.
I mean, anyone will get calm if you give it yeah, exactly. So,
so there's this famous, you've probably heard of it by some Chinese name that I can't pronounce, but the book Robinson Crusoe, which is a really early novel about a castaway. I think it's from like the early 1700s.
Yeah. 鲁滨逊漂流记, I think.
Okay, yeah. He lands on an island and he like builds
It's a children's book in
China. Yeah. So,
I mean, it's a children's book elsewhere too, I guess.
Yeah, it has adaptations. But in the sequel, he gets rescued and then he goes and trades opium in China.
Oh, really? I didn't read that book.
That's what he does after he gets off the island. He meets some people and they're like, you want to make a quick buck. Those Chinese people will really buy that.
This
opium.
is the new business now.
This is new business to get
Let's
into.
get in on it. Well, lots of people did.
Yeah.
Which we're gonna.
So it's an old trade.
Yeah. So at this point in history, with the common use of opium in medicine everywhere, the Western public developed an appetite to use opium for pleasure as well. Which is just a natural course.
I'm sure
how this goes.
I'm sure every year they developed a bigger appetite for opium.
Yes, but it become common because it was easy to obtain.
No, it's like when I was a kid. When you were a
kid.
Yeah. What do you mean? When I was a kid.
Well, are we talking about opium when you were a kid?
No, we're not talking about opium.
Okay.
We're talking about when you had an upset stomach, they'd give you this medicine that tasted like bubble gum, and I would want to just drink it, even when I
you're not
even when I wasn't sick. I'd be like, ooh, all right, let me go sneak some. And I'd be like, if you're taking medicine because you have a cold and it's opium, you're gonna want to take it
when you don't have a cold.
When you don't have a cold too.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is a good example, but like when I was getting vaccines in China when I was little, like just like whatever vaccine you need to get as a child, they will give you like a little sugar like pill. And like I would just always want to get back into the line and get another shot for it because they give it's sweet, it's candy.
You're super protected,
yeah.
Jerry.
Yeah, I don't think I was allowed to do that, but I really, I think I really wanted to. So that brings me to opium eating, the first wave of the modern opium experience.
Okay.
So in the 19th century, well, as we talked about, opium was widely available in at least England and America, right? It was sold by barbers. It was sold by tobacconists. which I didn't even know was a word. It was everywhere. And famous writers, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge or Charles Dickens, lots of them all used the drug and documented it. Sort of on the down low. They don't name it, but that's what it is that they're referring to.
Well, poets in this time period are like the modern equivalent of rock stars. Like there's no, you can't distribute music, right? I mean, it has to be played.
Yeah.
But you can distribute poetry.
Yeah.
Right? So
rock and roll and sex and drugs. And
the
drug at the time was opium.
Yeah, sex and drugs and writing poetry about birds.
And, they need inspiration. This is what they gotta do, for art. So there was this famous poem called Kubla Khan, written by Coleridge, and it was published in
Kubla Khan, of course, is
a legendary, Mongolian leader.
Yeah.
This poem was seen as one of his most important work, and he composed it under the influence of opium. Although technically speaking, it was by the prescription of an anodyne. Which just means a painkiller drug or medicine, but it is wildly believed to be opium.
Yeah. There weren't that many painkillers back then, let me tell you.
And you know what? A lot of them have opium in it. Probably most of them. Because if you look at medicine at the time, I mean, I guess like medicine today, right? Like it's got like a long list of ingredients.
People, I mean, if opium's going to make you feel better, whatever's wrong with you, especially if it's opium withdrawals.
Quick fix.
You're going to feel better just because opium makes you feel better.
Yeah.
So you're going to think, wow, this medicine really worked.
Mm-hmm. He says that he's taking it for medical purposes, but I feel like, I wouldn't put it past them to use it for pleasure. So I'm going to read a part of this poem. It's very passionate. You ready for it? But oh, that deep romantic chasen which slanted down the green hill athwart a cedarn cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as er beneath a waning moon was haunted by women wailing for her demon lover! Exclamation point.
The whole poem, I think,
poem is like that.
Is about him taking opium and imagining how sweet and baller
and grand
is Kubla Khan's like pleasure dome, pleasure palace.
His life is.
Yeah,
really, yeah.
And interestingly, there's a song by the band Frankie Goes to Hollywood called Welcome to. Oh, there's actually a whole album called Welcome to the Pleasure Dome. Which is
from this poem.
Which some of these lyrics are loosely based off of this poem.
This could be a lyric. This could be a rock song's lyrics. Yeah. So obviously he conveys the pleasure induced by opium in it. But a few years later, he wrote another poem called The Pangs of Sleep to describe the torment of opium addiction. So, you ready for it?
Yeah.
He wrote, by yesternight I prayed aloud, in anguish and in agony, upstarting from the fiendish crowd of shapes and thoughts that tortured me. A lurid light, a trembling throng, sense of intolerable wrong, and whom I scorned, those only strong. Thirst of revenge, the powerless well, still baffled and yet burning still. Desire with loathing strangely mixed, on wild or hateful objects fixed. Fantastic passions, maddening brawl, and shame and terror over all. So
I like his early poem. He's like, opium rules.
Yeah, this is fucking great.
I want to go do opium.
Holy,
with Genghis
enchanted,
Khan.
yeah.
A couple of years later, he's
Look
like,
at his life.
Oh man, opium sucks.
This agony.
I think that's the cycle of drug addiction, Sharon.
So there was another very important literature work, the Book of Confessions of an English Opium Eater, by which is an autobiography of Thomas D. Quincy.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you say eating opium, is it like what form is it that they actually eat?
Thomas D. Quincy, his form of opium was called laudanum, which was at the time was the most popular form, which is opium dissolved in alcohol.
Okay, so that's a double.
Yeah, double experience.
Yeah.
So it was published in 1821, an autobiography of his experience, and obviously pretty self-explanatory by the name of the book. It was about his opium eating addiction. The book was an overnight success, in which he details about how he got hooked on opium, his whole life story, how he tries to quit.
This is like a modern day rock star drug memoir.
Yes, I would say he's less cool than Coleridge.
Okay.
And you're gonna find out why in a second. For example, he would carefully plan for when he would take opium. He would take it the same day when he's going to an opera house and listen to his favorite singer. And he's like, oh God, there's delight to be had. And this is only very specific to me because I am a intellectual Englishman on drugs.
Those Chinese people on drugs could never have this experience that I'm having.
Well, he named, quote, no Turk or barbarian, quote, would experience the opera's beauty in the way that he did.
Everybody gives the Chinese diplomats in the early 1800s a hard time for calling them barbarians and having the minister of barbarians. But it's
yeah,
the British call them barbarians too. They weren't
shy about it either. So, he's a person who wrote stuff like this.
Yeah.
Quote him. This man, which is just someone in his life, had been appointed to his situation by college, Oxford, and was a sound, well-built scholar, but like most men whom I have known from that college, coarse, clumsy, and inelegant. A miserable contrast he presented, in my eyes, to the Etonian brilliancy of my favorite master.
Man, those peasant scrubs from Oxford.
Yeah. Which, he went to Oxford, by the way, and when he was there, he started the according to him, occasional use of opium. And he didn't graduate, so no degree for him. For Oxford.
Well, yeah, because he was an opium addict.
Yes, right. So, anyway, Eton College is that...
Isn't that where, Tony Blair and Boris Johnson and all these people went to?
Yeah, all the British...
Prime ministers
went there. All the British aristocracies went there. It's one of those places.
So he's writing a book about his drug addict, but also why he's...
But it's just to show off.
Also that he's better than everybody else.
Because he's an intellectual Englishman. Did I mention that?
Even though he failed out of Oxford.
Yes. So, apparently, according to him, again, he took opium a long time for pleasure, but did not get hooked on it. He was always carefully planning to not take it too frequently so that he could preserve the experience and, make sure that it's still effective.
Yeah.
But later in life, he started having stomach pain due to malnourishment as a child. And, he...
No, I think he probably had pains because he was having opium withdrawal.
It was taking for too long.
Yeah.
So he said that he took opium as a medicine and he got hooked on it. And then he tried to quit and it was really hard. And he had nightmares, the anguish that's written out in the book. And
it's basically the same as the opioid epidemic in the United States. It is hard to quit, right?
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. So at one point he woke up from nightmares, horrified, and then discovering that his children stood next to the bed that he had just wet. So pretty terrible for him.
Yeah.
But you know what's also terrible? His racism. This is one of those...
I liked your delivery on that line, Cherry.
This is one of those, I read the book so you don't have to moments. Okay? And
if I recall, Confessions of the Opium Eater, this was like a smash hit.
Oh, it was
period.
instantly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Okay.
So, I don't know. But racism was pretty explicit in his book, and he had nightmares when trying to quit opium. And in those dreams, he always had images of, quote, the Orient. And it's not like the people. And he was quote, stared at, hooted at, grinned at, chattered at by monkeys, by parakeets, by cockatoos. By cockatoos.
Cyberbird.
Yeah, okay. But that's basically Chinese people to him, I think.
Yeah.
So the book is,
so he kind of blames the
Orient. And he's not alone in that.
Even though all these drugs are probably made in an East India Company warehouse and brought back to England by the East India Company.
Right. So this is already, you see how this is going to play out much more later, especially in America and other places in the world. Anyways, the power and downside of addiction was not well understood in the Western society up until this point. There was a high, just like the first poem, there was a high on opium and on all sorts of other drugs too. Marijuana was a thing at this time. It was very popular to use drugs.
Well, that's actually, it's always a funny thing to me when people talk about drugs today as if we're some decadent society, and it's people did so many drugs.
So many drugs.
So many drugs back in the day.
Yeah.
like in the 50s and 60s, all those sitcoms with smiling housewives, they're all on essentially meth, on
Right.
amphetamines, and then back then before that it was opium. You know what I mean? I don't know. So,
It's like being a housewife, it's very stressful.
I know. Well, it's less stressful if you're on.
I know.
If you're on synthetic.
Maybe they needed it,
amphetamines.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So, but now, now it's sinking in. So, opium was finally banned in the Pharmacy Act of 1868, which was an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom.
So was it banned entirely or for recreational use?
It was banned so that the sales of poisons and dangerous drugs can only be limited to qualified pharmacists. So they're still using it in drugs, right? And it was faded out over time. It's not a free-for-all anymore. And opium was on the list of what they called poisons and dangerous drugs.
Okay.
And then in the United States, across the pond, in the New World, the first drug law was passed in San Francisco in 1875, banning the smoking of opium in opium dens. Although that's more about racism than anything else.
You should listen to our first episode.
Episode of the podcast.
Where there's a lot of laws just made to hurt Chinese businesses or to.
In San Francisco, the center of Chinese immigrants and racism, treatments. So now we get to the point of opium smoking. And that brings me to the second wave of the modern opium experience, opium smoking. So before opium...
And that's what everybody thinks of, right?
That's what everyone thinks of when they think about opium.
Opium pipes and opium smoking.
But opium eating was a big part in history, and I feel like it should not be ignored.
Yeah.
So before opium smoking was quote-unquote invented, and unlike how common opium was in England and America, though, in China, it was still of limited quantities. Until, you know who the culprit was? The East India Company. Not just the Malone, but, they're the biggest name in it. Until the West, started dumping opium into China for a profit. So opium addiction increased in China, and importation also at the same time grew very quickly during the first century of the Qing dynasty, which was the 17th century. And when the practice of smoking tobacco got introduced from North America to China, opium smoking came after. And many people think there's a correlation to the techniques.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think maybe it was Kangxi, I don't know which emperor it was at the time, when tobacco started getting introduced, they tried to ban tobacco.
Yeah.
And then eventually they just were like, it's fine. And they started giving it as a ration to the soldiers.
Yeah, that's when a drug goes from being banned to being like a commercial good or like a commodity. Yeah. And then opium smoking became a lot more popular in the 18th century. And by 1729, it had become such a big problem that the Yongzheng emperor, you know him, prohibited the sale and smoking of opium. And in 1796, the Jiaqing emperor outlawed opium importation and cultivation.
Okay.
Listen to our last episode, which goes a lot more into opium importation and the trade at this time. How the opium trade really started. Early in the 18th century, the Portuguese found that they could import opium from India and sell it to China for really good money. And so they did that. And then the British has discovered the opportunity. And by 1773, they became the leading supplier of the Chinese market.
Well, India is a big place. You can grow a lot of opium there.
Exactly. And apparently, American traders, which I had no idea, I didn't know America was in the picture, also tried to get on the act by importing opium to China from Turkey, which is where they sourced their opium from. And some New England families really prospered as a result. Probably made a lot of generational wealth from it.
So the Americans were interesting because they kind of got out of the game when the heat started going up.
Yeah.
Because America's not going to send a fleet to China.
Yeah, listen to our last episode.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, they were a big part of it too.
They were on it. But also one of the reasons is also that apparently Turkish opium is not considered as great by Chinese smokers.
Yeah.
So that the British India opium was more popular.
Had the best stuff.
Yeah. So opium smoking. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's get into it.
It's a much more elaborate and efficient form of delivering the drug into one's brain quickly, which is the goal, I guess, if you're a drug user, right?
So when you're eating it, does it take a while to get the effect?
Yes. When smoked, the chemicals pass into the lungs where they are quickly absorbed and sent to the brain, rather than if you're eating it. And there's this book called Opium Fiend A 21st Century Slave to a 19th Century Addiction by Stephen Martin, which is a very interesting book and is one that I would recommend. So we're going to get into his story in a second. But he said, quote, "The innovations that would give opium users a sophisticated and pleasurable high wouldn't happen until the 18th century, when some nameless Chinese craftsman whose creativity seems to have been surpassed only by his anonymity," that's a hard word to say, "came up with a design for a true opium pipe, an instrument whose purpose was not to burn opium, but to vaporize it." And he says nameless Chinese craftsman. There's no evidence like one Chinese person has invented it. So I refuse to, take the fall, but but it probably came from China. So, and he said someone in China was taking opium intoxication very seriously, quote. So it was a very stylish thing to do for the rich, opium smoking.
Okay.
Using the pipe. In China, the elites, they would have a whole lifestyle built around it. They would, go as far as having an opium room in their homes just for the purpose of smoking. And sometimes the ultra rich, they will have 2 rooms because there's no air conditioning back in the days, the sun, which direction and all that. Man. So that they would have it for different times of the year for the most optimal temperature control and stuff. And that's how, that's a whole lot. That's the dream,
Yeah.
So the smoking, it requires a very elaborate setup. There's the pipe, there's the lamp, which burns the opium on the pipe.
Okay.
There's the little accessories and tools.
It's like everybody has that friend that's really into smoking weed, and they've got
they've got all these accoutrements.
Accoutrements.
They got
the bong and a little cleaner and all kinds of different stuff. And
yes, and it's not just the tools. You need furniture because when you see pictures of opium dens, right? You see everyone lying down. There's like a little chair. Well, there's like a long bed, like day bed kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Right. And there's all these chairs around, so that someone can lie down. So
these are addicts, but at the same time, they might
not see themselves as addicts.
They don't want to just do the drug in a gutter.
Yeah.
They want to enhance everything around taking the drug.
And they didn't think it was it wasn't at the early stages. It wasn't
like a moral failure.
It was in many ways a privilege to do so.
Well, I know quite a few of the Chinese emperors. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm pretty sure Kangxi and who came after who's the guy who ruled a really long time? Qianlong. I'm pretty sure they didn't, but the later ones they would write like poems about how great opium was and stuff.
And we don't really advertise that, do we?
Yeah.
Because it's a one-dimensional thing. China's the victim of opium. So, also quote from Martin's book.
Okay.
Quote, "Once a dose of opium was prepared, the drug having been cooked, rolled into shape, and attached to the pipe bowl, the smoker then held the primed bowl just above the lamp while in a reclining position. This is the reason opium smokers are always lying down in old photographs. The position had less to do with opium making them drowsy, although after many pipes, it definitely did." And then I was like, okay, so it did make them drowsy. But anyway, so he says, quote, it had more to do with the fact that reclining was the best position for the smoker to comfortably hold the pipe steady over the lamp while monitoring the opium as it vaporized.
So I'm assuming it's partially because when I've ever seen opium pipes, they're really long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like, I'm assuming it's because so it cools down by the time it gets
so
to
your
you.
face doesn't get burned.
Yeah.
Also, not just like when it's delivered to you.
The lamp is
you don't want
hot,
to get too close to the lamp as well.
Okay.
To further prove that the image of someone lying down is not because opium makes you lazy and sleepy, which it does at the end of the day, he goes on to say that, instead of that quote, instead of using an oil lamp as a heating source, Middle Eastern smokers used a glowing piece of charcoal held with a pair of metal tongues. And because they didn't use an opium lamp, they would be able to indulge sitting upright because there's no need to...
so they'd use hookahs to do it.
Basically, a version of it, right?
Yeah.
To smoke opium because they don't have to monitor the pipe's distance and their own distance from the, own face distance from the flame. So... I would give it to him that it's true that I think the image of an opium user, smoker, of an opium smoker lying down nowadays it's a very charged image.
Yeah.
And there is a whole set of racist rhetorics that go with it and use that image for its own purposes.
Well, it's interesting because it is very, it's a very racially charged drug.
Yeah.
Like in a way that like alcohol or tobacco or even like marijuana and stuff doesn't necessarily bring up an immediate, you know what I mean? Like
it's
racial.
Like, is it heroin and, African Americans in America? Which drug is it? That's
crack.
the drug war on. Crack. Okay.
Yeah. Heroin's like white people.
Okay. Heroin's white people drug. Okay. So crack, right? It's like crack and the whole war on drugs thing. It's all, you cannot sever the image, the racial aspect of it.
Yeah. Or the racist aspect, right?
Yes.
Because it's used in like probably cartoons and propaganda and stuff.
Yes. So, but yeah, in China though, at this time, it's still an elite activity until it later spread to everyone. So that's how the elites in China did it, with style, an elaborate, expensive hobby.
Yeah.
That, requires a lot of upkeep.
Because it was probably real expensive at that point too to get the stuff.
Not only it was expensive to get the opium, it was expensive to do the whole lifestyle around it. And, they would purchase pipes, they would have lamps, specifically for this purpose. It's not just any lamp. It's an opium lamp. You can't just use a lamp that's, used for as a lighting source. And they were crafted from apparently the finest materials that one could find. And, the opium pipes were made of ivory, jade, porcelain, and rare hardwoods, apparently, and precious metals with valuable stones. So not only it's expensive, you're using it to show off. It's almost like fashion. Yeah. It's, you're using it to show off your own taste.
Yeah, how wealthy you are, how classy you are.
How classy and cultured you are. So that was the glamorous side of it. But, I don't want you to think that, you Natalie, and our listeners.
I was thinking whatever you're about to say, I was thinking.
Yeah. That the only opium users in China at this time were the ultra, rich and privileged, because it's also a drug for the poor as well. And opium as a drug, apparently one side effect of it is to reduce one's appetite. And it was a poor laborers drug, not just because, it's a drug and people want to do drugs and people are, can get addicted to it, but also because sometimes it can be cheaper to buy poor quality opium than food at times. And day laborers sometimes in parts of China get paid in opium. So they're meant to get hooked on it, and then they're kept in the debt because of it. And they're not smoking the good stuff. That's why you see all these images of like someone with like black teeth, like really dark teeth, because their teeth is coated with the tar that's from the bad quality opium.
So the cheap
which
stuff.
I think the opium's mixed with something that I forgot the name of it, but.
So the cheap stuff, you would get all sorts of bad stuff that would vaporize with the opium.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So, let's not forget that, as I'm here like talking up the glamour side of opium smoking. But back to the riches.
Let's get back. Don't forget Mao over there in the corner telling you to remember the peasants.
Exactly. Always in the back of my mind. Always on my shoulder, you know. Chinese society was high on opium, but they were not the only one. France, America, and even Canada all fell under the influence of opium smoking. So apparently in France, the opium was called the brown fairy. Like, the brown fairy.
That's probably to compare it to absinthe, which was called the green fairy. Absinthe is a liquor with a wormwood in it. Ah. It's very strong.
Is it French?
Yeah, it's French.
So they like to call these things.
I guess so.
Like mind-altering drugs fairies. I guess.
They must. I'd never heard of another color of fairy until now. So.
Right. Or in other cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah. So by the time France began to colonize Vietnam, opium smoking was already very common locally. There were Chinese immigrants that brought it there. There were local,
You're saying it was common in Vietnam?
In Vietnam, yeah.
Okay.
When they went there to ensure that the profits of opiums smoked locally did not go into the British pockets, they're like, we got to treat this stuff ourselves.
There's a market here.
Yeah. So in 1881, they established the Opium Rage, like REGIE, which was a government-controlled monopoly that promoted local poppy farming, and they they also imported the raw material from India and China, which, by the way, China didn't grow opium.
Well, I think it started growing more and more as time went on.
Yes. And again, we also don't, advertise that. So anyway, so then the French also oversaw refining and the licensing of opium dens locally. So they were all in on it. And Indochina, so that's what they called Vietnam, right, at the time when it was a colony for the French. Yeah, so by apparently 1914, 37% of Indochina, the colony's revenues were coming from opium, the sale of opium. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a whole cornerstone of the economy, 37%. So it brought a lot of money to them, but at the same time, it also brought opium to them as well. Not just they got them into opium. So it was illegal to smuggle the opium from the colonies back to France, but smoking it was not illegal. They didn't criminalize that. So there was a market and a demand for it back in France. And of course, opium is going to make its way back. And by the turn of the 20th century, opium smoking establishments, opium dens, was all over France.
Are these like classy establishments, like the one for rich Chinese people, or are these like...
These are the classic establishments in France.
Were there cheap opium dens too? Was there kind of a range?
I'm sure there were.
Okay.
Also, by the way, history is written by the people with pens
with money,
and money. So all the ones that got photographed and advertised and promoted through literature was by the high class,
by poets and writers.
And
so they're not going to
photographers.
They're not going to the ones on the dock.
No, they're not. Well, speaking of the dock,
okay, the
French naval officers, that group had a huge opium drug problem, apparently, and it was very embarrassing for them. Apparently, French naval officers have commissioned the type of opium lamps that are attached to gimbals, so that when they are traveling on the sea, it would be kept steady, so they can keep smoking it. Which is a lot of, again,
that's normally the amount of tension you put to like the ship's compass and the ship's clock.
Well, but opium is of that importance to them, right?
Yeah.
If a French officer is caught smoking an opium, they would have their dossiers marked with the initials FO, which is fumeur d'opium. That would, really affect their advancements up the ranks.
But they didn't get kicked out.
They didn't get kicked out. And in 1907, there was this one French officer who was charged with spying for the Germans. You know what he used as an excuse? He's like, I was addicted to opium. And if you look up, this again, New York Times, even though they recently published an opinion piece about abortion, that's just like, what are you thinking? But that's fine. We still have their subscription. It's, if you do a search, you'll find lots of opium articles, at this time in America, but also about the French. And so there was this article from April 1913 called Opium Degrading the French Navy. And a French admiral in the article talked about the fact that even the cadets on French training ships would frequent the opium dens of Toulon. So it was not a secret that they were on this stuff. In France, the interesting thing is it did not have much of a racially charged image of opium, and perhaps because not a lot of Chinese immigrants, but also opium was introduced back to France not by foreigners, but French themselves. So it took some time before the authorities felt like, okay, this is a problem. So, but now we're going to go to a much more racially charged place, America. Contrary to common belief, the Chinese did not bring opium to America. Because remember, it was everywhere in the world. However, I will say maybe Chinese people brought opium smoking to America. But opium itself, not so much. So before opium smoking, laudanum, the same opium and alcohol mix.
I think the technical term is tincture. Well, that thing that Thomas de Quincey was hooked on, was also very popular in America, along with all forms of drugs. The first known sort of on the record opium smoking den establishment was record to 1852, which was 3 years into the gold rush. Okay.
But still, it was only, amongst the Chinese population. And it took about another 20 years for the habits to got around to the white population.
Okay, so there was opium den, but it was like it was only for
Chinese people.
fellow Chinese people.
Yeah, well, they didn't mingle. They didn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was not a friendly situation in between different ethnicities at the time. So
really, Cherry, it wasn't.
Yeah.
That's a very
not friendly seems to be an understatement.
That's a very casual way of putting it.
Yes, this book called "Opium Smoking in America and China" by H. Kang, and he had warned America apparently about the rapid spread of opium smoking amongst Americans, and saying that this is going to be a thing.
This is going to be the public health crisis of our time.
Yes, and apparently he named the first white person, which I don't know how he did. Maybe he just, he's like, you're the first white person I know that uses opium.
Even though there were hundreds of thousands of white people who used opium because they ate it.
Yeah, but he pointed to this guy, a gambler, which also, by the way, racially charged because Chinese people were running, gambling houses as a source of income. But it was a gambler called Clandon who tried the drug in 1868. Like smoked it, I think. So apparently, according to this doctor, he was the first one to experiment with it. And that opens the floodgate. And also because in America, opium smoking arrived with the Chinese population, which especially is not a European one. It was viewed as way more of a threat than like it was in France. The drug's association with the Chinese population has just lingered for a very long time and wouldn't go away, even after it became widely smoked amongst other ethnicities of America. So, San Francisco. Seems like if you talk about Asian American history, San Francisco is always on the list of like, what did they do this time? So cities like where there's a concentrated Chinese population, like a Chinatown, so San Francisco and New York, they tried to control the spread of opium smoking by passing laws to say that non-Chinese residents that would go to Chinatown to go to the opium dens, they are banned from going there. Otherwise, they will receive jail time or fines. So this was very easy to enforce, obviously, because you're a white person, you can't go to Chinatown, right? And they would patrol around Chinatown. However,
there's no 99 Ranch back then. There was no legitimate reason to go to Chinatown.
Oh my God. There's no legitimate reason besides the smoking
gambling or no one's going there to get some boba.
Nope. This is going to create a problem for anyone with a logical mind because there would just be opium dens outside of Chinatown. Right. So, and at this point, there were also opium dens that were not operated by Chinese people. But the interesting thing is, even though they were outside of Chinatown, just on the common streets, and is a popular sort of like almost like a nightclub destination and atmosphere, the decorations inside remained very, quote, oriental. And I do quote because obviously we don't want to use that word today, but that's what, it had like Eastern Asian decorations.
So people expect you go there and you're going to have
they want an evening of like what they think is an exotic like escapism, right? So that just also stuck around. Whoever was operating the opium dens, imagine a version of what China was, but also in their minds, this is like a upscale, exotic, the upper class Chinese experience.
So they wanted to imagine
furniture, and
they wanted to imagine not what China was like, but what like Chinese prince life was like.
Exactly. So, and at this point, we have photography. So there were so many photographs that coming out of America that confirms the popularity of opium, especially with the non-Chinese population. And so photos of white smokers were very common, and they were smokers of African Americans, right, in New York, in an opium den. And authorities would raid opium dens, whether they're in Chinatown or not. They were trying to crack down on it, much like today. War on drugs never stopped. But they would find, Caucasians, African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans, Chinese people, all frequent opium dens. And this was old America, right?
Yeah.
This was when America was great. So, like, this was not okay.
It was great.
Did you like that?
Yeah.
Here's a drug, right, that encouraged the mingling of different classes and races of people.
Yeah.
And that was very taboo. Not like, it's almost like it's not the drug that itself that's taboo. It's what the drug did to people.
It's breaking down social barriers.
Yeah.
Were women there too?
Oh, yeah. That's the right next thing. You read my mind. So there's this book called The Black Candle, published in 1922, which was about drug use in Canada. and like Northern America in general. So the writer, Judge Emily F. Murphy, said, quote, "A man or a woman who becomes an opium addict seeks the company of those who use the drug and avoids those of their own social status. This explains the amazing phenomenon of an educated gentlewoman reward in a refined atmosphere consorting with the," I want to emphasize, this is her quote. I'm reading from the book. Okay. She said, "consorting with the lowest class of yellow and black men." So that was the danger, right? That was the pearl of the white woman getting.
Yeah. Also, though, it's kind of like maybe that lady just wants to date that black guy.
I know.
But it's like, no, it's the opium.
It's an opium.
Yeah.
And it was not uncommon to find housewives and just like married women, like, going to the opium, and then the husbands will report their wives has gone missing. And she would be found in the opium den. And
she's like, I cannot deal with that asshole.
Without a corset, like just all like relaxed and like,
yeah.
like, you know what I mean? Like it's an escape from the
rigid,
the patriarchal society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Not to say we're not encouraging you to do drugs, by the way, our
Yeah.
listeners. It's just to say that sometimes it's not about the drugs themselves.
Yeah.
So with the photographs, there were also postcards that became a thing and very popular at this time. And photographers would sell postcards and, trying to look for images that would be popular and would sell. And in places where opium was known to be smoked, which was, by the way, big cities in America, a postcard of a scene of opium smoking would be very popular.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's how we got those photographs, by the way. Like in many ways, that's how
I went to the big city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, but however, in places like China, for example, right, you can't just go into a real opium den. They're not gonna let you take pictures for postcards. Like it's not a, it's a place for enjoyment. It's a private situation.
Yeah.
So
this is
you know what they did?
This is like modern day, like Instagram people taking pictures of their food.
Yes. So it's the Instagram of the early 1900s.
It's like, does it matter if you go to the opium den if my friends don't know about it? Like,
yeah, exactly. In big cities like Hong Kong and Shanghai, they would recreate and stage the scene in like a photography studio. It's a whole business.
So you could go there and then
It's
lie
a whole
down
industry.
on the couch and pretend that you were.
Yes.
There's at least one film studio that has a fake private jet in it that people rent on Instagram. So you can like have it's like a fake like tube with like airline seats in it. So influencers can go there and be like, on my way to Maui.
Yeah.
And,
And that's it. And they would just leave. Yeah.
And they just leave.
Yeah.
And that's like this with the opium den.
Yes. I mean, that's a great example because that speaks to how this is a glamorous lifestyle,
it's
right?
not
You want to
shameful.
advertise, right?
Yeah.
You want to be seen as you're living it up.
Yeah.
In an opium den.
Because even like you said, Thomas Quincy
Thomas D. Quincy.
Thomas De Quincey, right? It's like, yeah, he's like, oh man, opium smoking's so terrible, I'm addicted. But also it kind of rules.
Yeah, no, it was such a weird experience reading the book because he obviously very proud of himself to be this upperclassman. And he considers the opium experience to be so divine.
Yeah.
But at the same time, being addicted to opium is so shameful and so terrible. So it's almost like to use it is fine as long as I'm the master of my own mind. But then to have given up and become the beholden to the drug is un-English like.
Which inevitably happens if you do
exactly.
opium
That's just a human
Yeah.
like that's how addiction works.
Yeah.
But he almost saw being addicted as a thing that's beneath his class.
Yeah.
Which is the game that they play, the society or institutions that place on addicts.
Yeah.
Or about like China, right? They go, oh, look in China, high on opium. They don't have self-control.
Yeah.
But it's not.
It's a drug.
It's a drug. And a glamorous lifestyle apparently at this time. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of the rise of the opium dens worldwide, not just in China. So then we're going to talk about how did it end, because it did end. We're no longer smoking opiums today, right?
We're still doing opiates. But
we're still doing opiates.
But it's no longer this.
Well, we're doing more efficient versions of it, I would argue.
Yeah, but it's no longer this glamorous social experience. It's now like a shameful.
If you're poor, it's a shameful experience.
If you're rich,
if you're a rock star, it's cool to do drugs.
Yeah, well, if you're rich, your doctor just gives them to you.
Yes. So, obviously, addiction, society realizing your drugs really mess you up. They outlaw it. But on the other hand, there's a lot of other factors as well. So the first one I could think of is racism. Although, again, not sure how much about how the opium smoking ended and the push from the racist side was about the drug itself, or how effective it was at the end to ban the drug. But in San Francisco, 1870s, there's this party called the Working Men's Party of California. And it was led by an Irish immigrant called Denise Kearney. And he had led mostly disgruntled Irish laborers who were competing with the Chinese laborers. So emotions run high, for jobs in building the railroads. They had campaigns and they incited violence, but they were very good at using anti-opium hysteria to whip up sentiments that had gained them a lot of political power locally. So besides racism, there was, at least in America, a whole... Because we know how opium ended in China. Yeah. Right? Opium wars, like 2 of them. We're going to talk about them. So
and also, I mean, the everybody from Ren Shikai to Chiang Kai-shek to Mao all took a stab at it. And it basically got stamped out in 1950s.
Yes. Well, everything got stamped out in 1950s.
No fun in China.
No fun. I mean, what are you talking about? There's so much fun. Clean fun. Yeah. Good, clean, communist fun.
Dances and songs.
Yeah. But in America, widespread Christian campaigns against opium smoking. So the Christians, especially the ones that came back from China too, they found that opium to be a ruthless demon. And very shockingly as just this thing that people shouldn't do. But sometimes they would also compare it to foot binding and female infanticide, which is... not the same thing. The other two are really, really are bad and are Chinese, but I don't know how I feel about comparing them. But
British people didn't import foot binding to China.
Exactly, right? So I don't know how I feel about them comparing that. But it's a sin. It's a sin. It needs to be eradicated. That was the point. They wrote books. They wrote articles. They traveled around and gave public talks at Westerners, especially in North America and in the UK. All these activism, I guess, anti-drug activism by the priests and the missionaries, that played a big part in generating the public outrage globally, especially in the Western society, to ban opium eventually.
Recreationally.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes me think, though, because if you look at, the United States very famously banned alcohol.
Yeah.
Prohibition.
Yeah.
But it didn't work because A, it's not that hard to make. And B, you had organized crime still smuggling the stuff in. Yeah. Right? But, you think about it, it's like, oh, well, why did opium prohibitions fail in China? Well, it's like, because there's people still bringing it in, right? I mean, the United States couldn't ban alcohol. The only reason we could ban opium is because there weren't British gunships bringing. So it's kind of like, it's no wonder China couldn't ban it, right? I mean,
couldn't ban it quickly enough.
Yeah, they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a way to stop it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the British, the gunships. So back to England, there's all these famous writers who not only did opium eating, but also wrote about opium smoking. Unlike all the photographs that came from the United States, France, and sometimes even Canada, there's not a whole lot of evidence, photographic evidence, of that being opium smoking is a popular thing, widespread thing in England.
Fu Manchu certainly seems like it is. Yeah.
Well, that's fiction, right? Yeah. So all of the portrayals are literary, and there's no photographic evidence, which is weird because at this time there was vast spread evidence of photographs and postcards coming from other places. So this British botanist explained this in his book called 7 Sisters of Sleep, which is about drugs. They said, quote, "Opium indulgence is, after all, very un-English, and never has been, not ever will be, remarkably popular. And if we smoke our pipes of tobacco ourselves, we cannot forbear expressing our astonishment at the Chinese and others who indulge in opium. Pity them we may, perhaps, looking upon them as miserable wretches the while, but they do not obtain our sympathies." And it's like...
So they're like, our drug is good, but their drug is bad.
Yeah.
Also their drug that we brought them for.
Yeah.
Got them hooked on.
Yeah, but that's beneath us, though. The drug that we make and bring to them, that's beneath us.
Well, it wasn't for
Thomas
Quincy.
Right? Did you want to talk about Fu Manchu real quick?
Well, so you're saying there probably wasn't actually...
I'm sure there were people smoking opium in England, but it was by no means a societal habit, a widespread phenomenon like it was in America or China. There's this writer called Arthur Morrison, who's known as have you heard of him?
No.
Okay, he's known for his like detective stories that are Sherlock Holmes-like.
Okay.
Like that's what he writes. And he wrote a nonfiction piece called Hidden London, describing the city's opium smoking scene for a magazine.
Okay.
And he said that there were only 2 opium dens in Limehouse whose existence that he was sure of. And one of them was mostly a show den, which is for tourists to visit and take photographs, like a photography studio. And apparently, like if no smokers were there at the time of the visit, when there were tourists, the tourists would be kept downstairs with excuses, and they will not open the rooms yet, and someone will be sent to fetch smokers. They're like, you gotta come now. We got visitors.
Go get the addicts.
Yes. And then sometimes they don't even always smoke opium if they can't get any real smokers to come in at,
so they just
on
put
demand.
tobacco in there or something.
Yeah, because they don't want to, they're going to get sick, or if they're not used to it.
Yeah.
So, so that might be evidence that it's not, after all, a widespread activity. But it's so funny. So that was the modern opium experience. Second wave. Like feminism, we have waves. Wave 3, which I would argue we're still in, is called, well, I wrote it as new products made from opium, which is lots of modern drugs that we use. So I don't need to go into that, right? Yeah. But also its cultural legacy. The book that I'm about to reference again, Opium Fiend, is a book that's written by this guy who's still around. He was collecting opium pipes, opium accoutrements in Thailand, Thailand.
Because they're pieces of art, right?
They're pieces of art, and they're, antiques. So he was collecting them. But then he got hooked on opium because he was like, let me use these things. Although actually, so from the book, he has smoked opium before he started collecting them. Because apparently in some corners of Asia, up until like 1990s, you could still smoke opium. There were like opium dens if you knew what to look for. So he is a guy, American. He's American. He grew up in San Diego. He was in the military. And he went to Asia, and he was one of those expats. His day job is to write for travel magazines. He's a part-time journalist, so that's the kind of life he was living. And he was living in a Chinatown in Thailand. And then he started collecting opium pipes, and then he really got into it. And he met people, right, who had ways to get opiums that he could smoke. So he started more and more often regularly smoke opium, and he got hooked on it, and it was terrible. And he quit. He still writes for magazines, and I know he said that he has jobs to work as consultants on movie sets and production sets, presumably for like opium smoking scenes.
Well, I guess it's sort of like a living art, if you want to call it an art, because most drugs, right? It's like,
performance art, an action is an art.
Yeah. Most drugs, people just take them, right? But it's like you can just take opium. Yeah. But someone probably has to show you how to do the opium pipe correctly, right? How to prepare.
Well, in the book, he was very snooty about people who weren't doing it right. And he thinks there's a lot of writers like Charles Dickens or whatever that would write about opium smoking in their fictions. Yeah. And he's like, they haven't smoked opium properly. They don't know what they're talking about. But again, getting addicted is very terrible. So yeah. So it also goes into the struggles of quitting, of his personal journey. Anyways, in his book, he mentioned that apparently there was a rumor the famous French designer Yves Saint Laurent YSL had a opium pipe collection, and it was said to be stored away at a secret location at Morocco. Presumably, it was not the kind of collectibles that are that one brags about. So I have found no evidence of that on the internet. However, YSL's most famous perfume, you know what it's called?
Opium.
It's called Opium. And it's really famous. In 1977, YSL, the French fashion brand, launched a new fragrance. However, the name, with its reference to the drug opium, caused a huge scandal and stir worldwide.
Sure, that's why he chose it.
By the way, in 1977, China was not reacting to this news because that was the end of Cultural Revolution. Like, we had our own problems. So mostly the drama was in America, the biggest market at the time. And so the fragrance itself was a huge commercial success. In 1 year alone, in Europe, it had collected $30 million of sales. And so this perfume is still on the shelves today and still one of their most popular perfumes.
Well, do you know what's funny? Sax Rohmer is a dirtbag. He's the guy who wrote Fu Manchu. But one of his early scams was he invented a perfume and called it Opium. I think he called it Opium. And he sold it in London Chinatown. And he had people dress up in like Manchu outfits. And he sold it.
I feel like you've talked about it in the Opium episode.
So maybe YSL stole it from Sax Rohmer.
In an interview in Women's Wear Daily, 18th, 1978, called YSL on Opium. Quote, I wanted a lush, heavy, and languid perfume. I wanted Opium to be captivating, and I wanted its scent to evoke everything I like. The sophisticated Orient, Imperial China, and exoticism. And it's like, oh, can you be more?
Well, the funny thing is, though, is if it's in the 70s, right?
Yeah.
The designer could have been alive when opium dens were popular in France, right?
I know.
He might remember exactly what they smelled like. So if you really think about it, though, it's like the drug users today, opium addicts today, a pale imitation of the grandeur of what they could have of what it meant to be a drug addict in 1920.
Yeah.
An opium addict would be looking at like a heroin addict today with the needles and the spoon and stuff, and they would just be disgusted.
Yeah, you peasant. So anyway, New York Times, April 24th, 1979, an article called Chinese Americans Join Other Groups in Campaign Against Opium Perfume. So the article started with, will YSL, Charles of the Ritz, which is the corporation that's behind it, and the Squibb Corporation changed the name of Opium, one of the country's best-selling fragrances, to Lotus or Enhancement or Jewels of the Orient. And I'm like, how is Jewels of the Orient better? How?
Could you please pick another vaguely racist name?
Yeah. So, sorry, not enhancement, enchantment. Enchantment. And the people, multiple organizations wrote to the corporation behind the brand that said, quote, the use of negative Chinese images to market opium is not at all unlike the use of negative black images to market a product named heroin, I guess crack, or similarly negative white images to market Valium, said the letter in part.
Okay, I guess even back then, white people do love drugs. It's always funny people act like. Yeah.
Yeah. No, white people aren't above it. No one's above it. It's a human condition. Yeah. So the reply from the chairman of the corporation.
Do you know who is above it, Cherry? Communists.
Communists, exactly. The chairman of the corporation wrote a letter in response to that. He said that the marketing strategy was based on, quote, the romance, mystery, and the beauty of the Orient. And then he also says, all evidence from the field shows that it is, in fact, perceived in precisely this way by consumers. And he's like, no, we are going to fetishize the Orient. We're going to continue to fetishize China. And
people love
it.
Yeah.
So you just shut up, not my problem. So talk about the cultural legacy. And if you look at, obviously, perfume, it's a seductive, it's always being sort of like a sexual seductive product. That's how they market it, right?
Yeah.
I don't need to go into marketing strategies of perfumes.
Yeah.
But it's not the only perfume that sexualizes like a woman's body, right? For example. But this is very oriental. This is pretty troublesome.
Yeah.
Even on the baseline of perfume marketing in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. So another article much closer to today, published in LA Times in 2000.
Okay.
Says, China sees a den of indignity in perfume. And we're talking about the same perfume here. And the article starts with, quote, opium has been banned once again in China because of its harmful effect on society, but this time it is not the drug. It's the perfume. country. And, quote, fearful that the name opium might lead to the, quote, spiritual pollution of Chinese youth, quote, and mindful of the heavy price China paid in the opium wars and addictions of the 19th century, the Chinese government has ordered the popular YSL fragrance off the shelves of department stores across the country.
So they're afraid if kids smell it, they're gonna want to do real opium.
I guess so. It's like I guess violence in video games, and also it's also a national shame thing. Like there's a lot of baggage there. But you know what? It's not banned in China. It's like one of those boycotts. Like it's still everywhere in China. And it's still called opium, and it's sometimes it's called black opium. Apparently there's a red opium. Like there are variations of the bottle. So my guess is that this is going to be Chinese internet's next target, readily available for when we need a boycott. We're just keeping it around.
We'll keep this prediction in our back pocket so we can go up.
Yeah, look at that. Caught it. But yeah, no, it's everywhere. It's still being sold. So I think it was like they put the license and they were like, can you change the name? It's too charged. And the YSL was like, it's a whole big thing to change the name of a perfume because what is a perfume if not the marketing behind it, you know? But it's still around. So I'm not saying like I don't want it to be around, but I'm saying it's a cultural legacy that I'm not sure is positive. It's a very troublesome cultural legacy to still have this image of opium and a female body to be like fetishized. And the orientalism, I don't even need to explain it, right?
Yeah.
So that's the cultural legacy of it, which is we're in the third wave. And the last thing I want to say is that opium is not a Chinese sin. I guess if you're listening to our podcast, I guess you don't have that view. So I don't know if maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but the bigger
it doesn't
thing
even come from China. It comes from Europe.
I know. But
the Middle East, yeah.
But the problem of addiction is that it's just a human condition.
Yeah.
If it's not opium, there will be other drugs, right? And what drug gets popular and commercialized really depends on how easy it is to transport the drug, how efficient it is to deliver it to one's brain.
Who can make money from it?
Right? And so, but that's all. There's going to be drugs. And people are going to get addicted to drugs. Yeah. And simply banning it is not, or battle it with racism is not a good way to go.
Yeah.
I think America has hopefully learned the lesson of war on drugs. So I don't need to go too much
It'd be cool
too deep
if we had
into
opium dens in the U.S. Maybe California can legalize that next.
Opium?
Yeah.
Well, you would have the problem because apparently it's really hard. Thanks to Martin and his book, because he's an opium addict, and so he's like, how do I get a hold of opium in the smokable form? And apparently it's very difficult because opium, as much as is widely farmed in many areas, like Middle East, right, a lot, it's all of it just gets immediately purchased and made into other forms of drugs, which is a whole industry. It's the pharmaceutical industry, right? There's the legal part, there's the illegal part of it. So they all fight after the source, and not much of it gets left behind for some individual.
For some weirdo who wants to smoke it in an opium pipe. For
some personal buyer who's not a corporation or a drug cartel to like purchase and make it into their form of chandu or whatever it's called, to be smoked. Yeah.
Maybe we can get like marijuana dens.
Or they have hookah lounges.
Yeah, no, but that's not the same. That's just tobacco.
Right. Well, okay. This episode is not to promote drug use.
I want to engage in some orientalism and lie on a couch and have the pipe.
Well, you should contact Martin. Still around.
Maybe you can hook me up.
Yeah, you can talk about how we're all like from California and like you just find Asian people exotic.
Yeah, that's why I did this podcast.
Yes, you did this podcast. Let's go smell the opium perfume next time we're in a
fancy store,
in a mall. Yeah.
No, let's go in there dressed as Red Guards and smash the.
I don't know. I think we'll get arrested. I think that's a crime. I think that's criminal activity against capitalism.
But it is interesting though, right? Because it's like we think of drugs in a way as just the drug, right? It's just a chemical, but.
Versus to who? Addicts?
No, I mean just like in that there's also a social aspect to it.
Oh yeah, it's never just about the drug themselves.
Right, and there's an art to it, and that while the drug still exists in various forms, that entire culture is gone. And, and probably I think a lot of people would say for the better, right?
Right. But I would say
the Communist Party would definitely say for the better. But it is something that has been stamped out, right? That people in major cities across the world would have been completely familiar with.
Yes.
100 years ago, and now it's just completely gone.
Yeah. But I mean, the legacy and lots of the negative legacy of it, right, is still around.
Yeah.
Still haunting us.
Well, next episode, we're going to talk more about the Opium War. And then I think we're going to review a movie about the first Opium War, which should be interesting. And I think I need to end this episode because our cat is meowing to get out of the room I locked him in because he kept bumping into our mic stands while we were talking.
He's not abused. It's a big room.
No,
he's fine. Yeah.
It's a tiny room. It's a prison.
It's a kiddie prison.
Well, anyway, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Look forward to more. And have a nice day.
See you next time.